Hello and welcome to Sovereign Moves. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for the latest insights.
Right now, a geopolitical crisis is unfolding in real time, and at its center is one of the world's most critical rising powers. India is facing a threat to its very survival, and a clock is ticking down. In this briefing, we're going to dissect the anatomy of this crisis piece by piece.
We'll break this down into 5 chapters. First, the countdown itself. Then, the market pressure point. We'll look at the military reaction, the diplomatic failure that caused it, and finally, the economic fallout.
So let's get right to it. Just how dire is the situation for India? Well, the answer really comes down to a single stark number.
9. That's it. That's the window. 9 days. But 9 days until what?
That is how long the entire nation can function on its emergency fuel supply before everything grinds to a halt. For a country that imports nearly 89% of its crude oil, this is the absolute final line of defense. The stakes really couldn't be any higher.
Now, this is the official government assessment. On paper, India has these massive underground caverns with the capacity to store enough oil for about 10 days. It's the exact kind of buffer you want for a crisis like this. But capacity is one thing. What's actually in those caverns is a totally different story.
And this is the critical vulnerability. Those reserves aren't full. They're not even close. They are sitting at just 63% capacity.
So that 9-day buffer we're talking about, it's not a hypothetical. It's based on the actual amount of crude in storage right now. And a major reason those reserves were never topped off is the rapidly deteriorating geopolitical situation, which all came to a head with the total collapse of diplomatic talks in Islamabad. We'll come back to that.
With its emergency tank running dangerously low, India can't just sit this out. It has to go and buy oil on the open market. The problem is, that market is in a state of absolute chaos.
And we're not just speculating. The International Energy Agency, the gold standard for this kind of data, just released its April market report. The findings are, frankly, staggering. We are officially witnessing the largest single disruption to global oil supply ever recorded.
Look at these numbers. In just 1 month, over 10 million barrels of oil per day have just vanished from the market. To put that in perspective for you, that's like the entire daily production of Saudi Arabia disappearing overnight. The cause? The conflict that has effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
This gets to the heart of the problem. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a waterway, it's the planet's energy windpipe, and with it closed, nearly a third of all seaborne oil is now trapped. For a country like India, this isn't some distant problem. It's a direct existential threat.
Because look at this, over half of all the oil India buys comes directly from the Middle East, and the vast majority of that has to pass through that exact choke point. The Hormuz noose, you see, is tightening specifically around India's neck.
And the result of this supply shock is as predictable as it is devastating. $130. That's the new price for a single barrel of crude. For a massive importer like India, trying to buy oil in this market isn't just tough, it's becoming financially impossible.
So, with your reserves draining and the market on fire, what's your next move? For New Delhi, the answer is to shift from an economic footing to a military one.
India's top naval commanders just concluded an emergency conference, and their new mandates are crystal clear. You just have to look at the very first point: swift naval deployments to safeguard energy security. This isn't business as usual. This is a fundamental change in posture. They're preparing for action. Let's be very clear what active interdiction means. The Indian Navy is no longer just playing defense, passively protecting shipping lanes. They are now actively moving warships into the Arabian Sea to directly secure the energy lifelines that are vital to the nation's survival. It's an incredibly bold and high-stakes gamble.
But all the naval power in the world can't fix a diplomatic breakdown. And this is where that Islamabad collapse we mentioned earlier comes roaring back into the picture, triggering a direct, unavoidable confrontation.
It all fell apart with breathtaking speed. On April 11th, those high-stakes talks in Pakistan between the US and Iran, they collapsed. The very next day, the failure was announced to the world. And just 48 hours after that, the United States announced a full naval blockade of all Iranian ports. The window for a peaceful solution didn't just close, it was slammed shut.
Now, this action puts India in an absolutely impossible position. And that's because it strikes at the very heart of Indian foreign policy, a concept known as strategic autonomy.
For decades, India has prided itself on making its own choices, on not being forced to pick sides between the great powers.
And this lays out the brutal choice India is now facing. Does it defend its long-standing policy of strategic autonomy, defy the U.S. blockade, and secure the energy it needs to survive? Or does it bow to the new geopolitical reality, honor the blockade, and risk its entire economy seizing up? There are no good options here.
And regardless of which path India takes, the economic consequences are already starting to cascade through the country.
You don't have to take my word for it. This is from India's own Chamber of Commerce. They're calling this the most disruptive geopolitical shock possible. This isn't just about fuel prices anymore. This is a systemic shock, leading to what they call an inflationary spiral that could cripple the entire economy.
So is there a way out? Is there a short-term alternative? Can India just pivot to new suppliers? Find some kind of diplomatic off-ramp? Every single option is difficult, and every single option takes time, and time is the one commodity India simply does not have.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to that single urgent question. With the Strait of Hormuz closed, with prices at crisis levels, and with military forces on the move, has that 9-day countdown already begun?
That brings us to the end of today's analysis. If you found this breakdown valuable, a simple way to support the channel is by hitting that like button. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forces shaping our world. Thanks for watching Sovereign Moves, and I'll see you in the next one.